67-year-old Daniel Whitfield had 11 days to decide whether to sell his late aunt's 22-acre apple orchard for scrap land or hand the county $14,300 he did not have. What he did not know was that 300 miles away, a plant pathologist had already circled his aunt's name in red ink. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between a pharmacy flyer and the electric bill, and Daniel almost threw it away with the rest. He didn't open mail standing up anymore. That was a habit from 35 years of grading papers at a small college outside Boston. You sat down first, coffee in hand, because whatever the page said, you'd need both hands free to deal with it. He was retired now, 4 years a widower, and the only ritual left from his old life was that same slow unfolding of paper at the kitchen table, the low afternoon light coming through a window he hadn't washed since spring. His daughter called twice a month, always at 6 p.m., always for 11 minutes. He knew the pattern the way he knew the sound of his own furnace kicking on. Predictable things were the only things he trusted anymore. His wife, Carol, had been gone 4 years. An aneurysm, no warning, no goodbye. And since then, Daniel had built his days out of small, controllable rituals, because the large things had already proven they could not be trusted. The letter was from the Windham County Treasurer's office. His Aunt Eleanor's orchard, Whitfield Orchard, 22 acres in the hills outside a town so small it didn't have its own zip code, was 7 years behind on property taxes. Eleanor had died in March, at 91, with no children, and Daniel, her only living nephew, had inherited the land along with a farmhouse, a collapsing barn, and as far as anyone could tell, a financial hole. He hadn't set foot on that orchard in almost 30 years. The last time he'd been 38, driving up with Carol and their daughter for a single, awkward Thanksgiving, and even then the trees had already been going wild at the edges. Eleanor too proud to admit she couldn't keep up with all of it alone. In his memory, the orchard was still the place from his childhood. Rows of trees in disciplined lines, the particular grassy, fermented sweetness of drop apples in September, his aunt in a canvas apron with a patch pocket shaped like an apple, calling him in for supper before the light went. That apron still hung on a nail by the farmhouse's mudroom door, he would later learn, exactly where she'd left it. Whatever the orchard had become, it wasn't that place anymore. The county letter made that clear enough. An assessment attached, a curt paragraph about agricultural land in a state of long-term neglect. A number that made Daniel's stomach drop. He folded the letter, set it beside his coffee, and understood, without yet knowing why, that this was not going to stay a simple problem. The drive up from Massachusetts took just under 4 hours, and Daniel spent most of it rehearsing a conversation he assumed would be short. Assess the damage, call a land broker, sign whatever needed signing, drive home. He had never grown so much as a tomato plant. He did not know what a fire blight was, or a rootstock, or why anyone kept records on which cultivar bore fruit in which decade. He was a man who had spent his career close reading hawthorn and cather, not soil, and he'd told himself somewhere around the New Hampshire border that this trip was a formality. 3 or 4 hours of unpleasantness he could put behind him by the weekend. The orchard, when he finally turned up the gravel drive, did not look like something waiting to be saved. It looked like something the forest was in the process of taking back. Waist-high brush choking the rows, saplings pushing up through what had once been mowed lanes, a barn roof sagging so badly on one side that light came through it in a long yellow blade. A wooden sign, hand-carved, Whitfield Orchard, Est 1954, lay face down in the grass near the entrance, one corner rotted soft. Daniel parked the car and sat behind the wheel for almost a full minute before getting out, the engine ticking as it cooled, 22 acres of his childhood summers spread out in front of him, gone quiet and strange. He walked the first 2 rows alone before Carla arrived, mostly because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Up close, The neglect had a kind of violence to it he hadn't expected from photographs. Bark split and peeling on trunks that had once, in his memory, been smooth and orderly. Entire limbs snapped and hanging, undisturbed for what looked like years. The ground beneath thick with a decade of unharvested drops gone to rot and returned to soil. And yet, here and there, absurdly, a tree still held fruit, small, misshapen, unmistakably apples, clinging on in a landscape that everyone kept telling him had nothing left worth saving. The land broker Daniel called met him there 2 days later, a brisk, not unkind woman named Carla Ostrander, who had sold half the farmland in the county at one point or another. She walked the first 3 rows with him, snapping photos on her phone, and did not sugarcoat it. "Your aunt's trees are past commercial life," she told him, crouching to peel a strip of bark from a trunk gone grey and cracked. "Nobody's buying 22 acres of overgrown heirloom apple trees to run as an orchard. What you've got here is raw land. You clear it, you subdivide it, maybe you get 4 house lots out of it if the town approves. That's your value. The orchard itself—" She shook her head. "The orchard itself is worth nothing, less than nothing, once you count what it costs to clear." She quoted him a number for removal that was almost as bad as the tax bill. Daniel stood in the wreckage of rows his aunt had walked for 60 years and did the math in his head, and the math did not work. 11 days to decide, Carla reminded him as she left. The county wouldn't wait longer than that before starting the lien process. What was he going to do now? He spent that first night in the farmhouse, in his aunt's bed, because his own house felt very far away, and he found, strangely, that he didn't want to leave yet. The mattress smelled faintly of cedar and something floral he couldn't name, and above the headboard hung a small framed photograph of Eleanor as a young woman, maybe 25, standing in front of trees half the height of the ones outside now, squinting into the sun with an expression Daniel remembered exactly, a kind of stubborn, private amusement she'd worn her whole life, as if she alone were in on some joke about how things would eventually turn out. In the morning, coffee in hand, he wandered into what had been Eleanor's small study off the kitchen, mostly to see what needed to be thrown out. Instead of trash, he found order. Dozens of black composition notebooks, spines cracked, filled floor to ceiling on 2 sagging shelves, each one labeled by year in his aunt's tight, sloped handwriting. 1961 through 2019, nearly 60 years without a gap. He pulled one down at random. Pages of dates, weather notes, tree numbers, grafting records, sketches of leaves and blossoms, observations written with the patience of someone who expected no one would ever read them. Some entries were purely practical. Sprayed row 4, aphids on 12 and 13, and others slipped, almost without warning, into something closer to a diary. A line about missing her late husband on the anniversary of his death. A note about Daniel's own visit decades earlier. Nephew came with his wife and the little one. Good to have noise in the house again. He didn't understand most of the technical entries, but something in the sheer discipline of it, 60 years of one woman quietly documenting a place everyone else had already written off, made him sit down on the study floor and start reading. One notebook at a time, while outside the light shifted and the 11 days kept ticking down. He had no idea yet that 2 counties away, someone had spent the last 8 months looking for exactly this. Daniel gave himself 3 days before making any final call to Carla, and he spent them doing the only thing that felt useful, clearing brush by hand along the first 2 rows nearest the farmhouse, mostly so he'd have something to show for his time, besides a stack of unread notebooks. He was hopeless at it. He borrowed a pair of loppers from the hardware store in town, along with a pair of leather gloves the clerk insisted he'd need, and came home each evening with blistered palms and a back that reminded him, sharply, that he hadn't done physical labor since he was a graduate student unloading library carts for spare cash. He fell into a rhythm anyway, sun-up to early afternoon, and found something almost meditative in it, cutting, dragging, stacking. the mind going quiet in a way it hadn't since Carol died, since every hour of his retirement had otherwise been filled with the particular restlessness of a man who no longer had somewhere he had to be. The county tax office called twice, a clipped procedural voice reminding him of the deadline, of the exact figure, $14,300, of what would happen if he let the date pass, a lien, and then, eventually, a forced sale at auction. A man from the county planning board drove out unannounced on the second day, walked the property line with a clipboard, and told Daniel that if he wanted to subdivide instead of paying the tax bill outright, that was also an option, though it would take longer than 11 days to process, which meant, functionally, it wasn't an option at all, only a longer, slower version of the same ending. On the third evening, a black SUV Daniel didn't recognize pulled up the gravel drive just as the light was going gold and long. A woman got out, early 40s, quick, purposeful movements, a canvas satchel over one shoulder, and introduced herself as Dr. Naomi Chen, a research pathologist with the University of Vermont's Agricultural Extension Program. She said she'd read about Eleanor Whitfield's death in a county paper's obituary section, of all places, months after the fact, and that she'd been trying, on and off, for the better part of 8 months, to track down a Vermont orchard connected to a name buried in some old extension records she'd stumbled across almost by accident. She didn't explain further. Not really. Deflected, in fact, with the practiced ease of someone used to keeping colleagues from getting ahead of confirmed data. She asked instead whether she could take a few leaf and bark samples from a handful of specific trees. Trees she pointed to using a hand-drawn diagram she pulled from her satchel, rows and numbers sketched with a precision that made Daniel's stomach tighten, because it was clearly not something she'd made up on the spot. It looked old. It looked like it matched something. He asked her directly what she was hoping to find, and she paused long enough that he noticed it. "I'd rather not say until I know for certain," she told him. "I've chased 3 dead ends already this year. I don't want to hand you a hope I can't back up." She was polite, professional, and gave away almost nothing beyond that, only that there might be something here worth looking into, before packing her samples into a cooler and driving off, leaving Daniel standing in the dusk with more questions than he'd had that morning. He went back to the notebooks that night with new urgency, searching for anything that matched what Dr. Chen had asked about, cross-referencing her hand-drawn diagram against Eleanor's row numbers by flashlight at the kitchen table. Deep in the 1968 volume, he found it. A pressed leaf, brittle and flattened between 2 pages, and beside it, dense notes about a seedling Eleanor's own mother, Ruth, had planted decades earlier. A tree, it seemed, that had shown some strange resistance the year a blight swept through and killed off half the row around it. "Lost 11 trees in the East Block this July," the entry read. "Ruth's seedling untouched, same as 61. Nobody can explain it. She always said her father brought the original rootstock over from an orchard that doesn't exist anymore." Eleanor had underlined one line twice, the ink gone brown with age. "Nobody else has this tree anymore." Daniel read it 3 times before he understood he was looking at something. He just didn't yet know what, or whether 60-year-old handwriting in a dead woman's notebook would mean anything at all to a scientist who dealt in laboratories and data, not memory. Carla called the next morning to check whether he'd made his decision, and for the first time since the letter arrived, Daniel asked her to give him more time. Dr. Chen came back 4 days later, this time with a folder instead of just a satchel, and sat with Daniel at the same kitchen table where the county letter had first landed. What she told him arrived in careful pieces, the way people speak when they don't yet want to promise more than they know. Modern commercial apple orchards, she explained, were dangerously uniform. A handful of popular cultivars grown across millions of acres, which meant that when a new strain of fire blight or a resistant fungal disease showed up, It could tear through entire regions with almost nothing standing in its way. Genetic diversity, old, useless, commercially abandoned varieties, like the ones rotting in Eleanor's rose, were sometimes the only reservoir left of natural resistance traits that modern breeding had bred out in the name of size and shelf life. Extension records from the 1960s records Dr. Chen had spent months chasing through 3 different archives, referenced a seedling tree on a Vermont farm belonging to a woman named Ruth Whitfield, Eleanor's mother, that had survived an outbreak that killed almost every other tree in the region. The records called it, informally, the Whitfield seedling, and then the paper trail went cold for over 50 years, until an obituary mentioned an orchard and a name in a county doctor Chen had already been quietly investigating. "I think it might still be alive out there," she said, nodding toward the rose outside the window, and Daniel watched her choose her next words carefully, the way he imagined she chose every word when talking about unfinished science. "But I can't tell you which tree, or whether the resistance is even still genetically intact after 60 years of neglect, or what any of this is actually worth until we run proper testing. DNA sequencing, disease trials, comparison against the modern strain that's causing the damage. That could take months, and honestly, it might come back with nothing." She was careful, too, to lower his expectations on a second front, watching him closely as she said it, as if she'd had this exact conversation with hopeful landowners before and knew how badly it could be misheard. "And I want to be honest with you because I think people imagine something different when they hear valuable to science. Even if this checks out completely, it's not going to make you rich. Research institutions don't pay landowners the way people imagine. There's no lottery check. What it could mean, best case, is a conservation partnership. Some funding, a modest grant, researchers coming and going, your name in a paper somewhere. Not a windfall." Daniel almost laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. 11 days had already narrowed to 7, and now the one lead he had came wrapped in a warning that it wouldn't solve his money problem even if it turned out to be real. Before she left, Dr. Chen added one more complication, almost as an afterthought, pausing at the door with her satchel already over her shoulder. The university's testing budget for the season was already committed elsewhere, spoken for by 3 other projects with more institutional weight behind them, and getting his orchard prioritized on a timeline that mattered to him would require someone senior enough to make the case internally. Someone she wasn't sure she could reach or convince in time. The next 4 days blurred into something Daniel hadn't experienced in years: full, aching, purposeful exhaustion. He couldn't wait for a university committee to decide his timeline for him, not with the county clock still running, so he did the only thing available to a man with no farming skill and no money. He went to work with his own hands, trying to identify and protect whatever trees the diagram and the notebooks suggested might matter, in case this turned out to be real. He borrowed pruning tools he didn't know how to use correctly from a neighboring farmer, a gruff, skeptical man named Russ Pelletier, who'd known Eleanor for 40 years, had brought her firewood every winter after her husband died, and initially seemed to regard Daniel as exactly what he was afraid of: a city relative come to cash out land nobody in the family had bothered visiting in decades. The first morning Russ showed up unannounced. He mostly just watched Daniel work in silence, arms crossed, offering nothing but a single grunt when Daniel nearly took off a finger with a pair of loppers he was holding wrong. Russ warmed slowly, then not so slowly, once he understood what Daniel was actually trying to do, and started showing up most mornings after that to teach him, with visible impatience, how to tell a living branch from a dead one by the give in the wood, how to make a clean graft instead of a ragged one, how not to strip bark clearing brush with a machete like a man who'd never held one, which, Russ pointed out more than once, Daniel had not. They worked mostly in silence, broken by short, gruff instructions and the occasional story about Eleanor that Russ seemed to offer almost against his will, as if he resented how much he still missed her. Eleanor didn't let this place go because she was lazy. Russ told him once, not looking up from a cut he was making, sap running dark over his knuckles. She let it go because she got old and nobody came to help her. Called me the week before she went into the hospital, asked if I'd check on the East Block. I never made it out there. You understand the difference between lazy and alone? Daniel did not answer that directly, but something in it lodged in him and stayed, and he found himself, in the days that followed, working harder in the fading light than he needed to, as if trying to make up for a debt that wasn't strictly his. Not everything went well. A hard rainstorm in the second week knocked down a section of rotted fence, and, with it, one of the older trees. Dr. Chen's diagram had marked with a star, not one of the critical candidates, thankfully, but close enough to shake Daniel badly. Close enough that he spent an entire night convinced he was about to lose the one tree that mattered before anyone had even confirmed it existed. He stood out in the mud at midnight with a flashlight, checking every marked tree twice, soaked through, thinking about how easily 30 years of neglect could undo whatever 60 years of care had built, and how little control he actually had over any of it. The developer Carla had mentioned earlier, a regional builder named Whitmore, who'd been eyeing subdivided lots in the area for 2 years, ever since a neighboring farm had sold off in pieces for a tidy profit, showed up uninvited on a Thursday afternoon with an offer that would have covered the tax bill in full and left something over besides. Cash, closing in 10 days, no orchard preservation required, no research complications, nothing but a clean, fast solution to every problem Daniel currently had. Whitmore was friendly about it, almost kind, the way men are kind when they know they're offering someone an easy way out of a hard week. Nobody would blame you, he said, handing over his card. It's just trees. Land's worth more without them, honestly. Daniel stood in his driveway, holding the man's card for a long time after he drove off. 7 days had become 3. Dr. Chen still hadn't confirmed university funding, and her last message had been careful, non-committal. The department head's decision apparently still working its way through channels Daniel didn't understand and couldn't influence. He had cleared maybe a third of the marked trees, badly, hands blistered past the point of healing between shifts, and had no real proof any of this amounted to anything beyond an old woman's careful notebooks and a scientist's hopeful hunch. That night, for the first time since he'd arrived, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with Whitmore's card in one hand and the county's number in the other, and seriously considered calling it done, selling, paying the tax bill, letting the land become 4 house lots, and closing the book on something that had never really been his to begin with. Something he'd spent 3 exhausting weeks trying to save for reasons he could no longer fully explain even to himself. What stopped him, in the end, was rereading the last notebook Eleanor had ever kept, the 2019 volume, its final entries thin and shaky-handed as her body gave out. The last page wasn't about trees at all. It was a short note to no one in particular, dated 11 months before she died. I don't know if anyone will ever read these. I kept this place because my mother kept it, and because something in this ground is worth more than what it sells for. If you're the one who finds this, don't let them tell you it's worthless just because it's hard. Daniel sat with that for a long time. Then he put Whitmore's card in a drawer and called Dr. Chen instead. She called back the next morning with 2 pieces of news delivered in the same careful, unhurried voice she always used. The first was that early lab results on the samples had come back promising. Genetic markers consistent with strong resistance to the modern blight strain currently devastating orchards 2 states over, present in at least one of the trees Daniel had spent the last 2 weeks protecting. The second was that she'd finally reached the right person, a department head who understood immediately what a 50-year-old resistance trait, still alive in situ, could mean for breeding programs currently struggling against a disease with no easy answer. The university wanted to move fast, not to buy the land, but to formalize a conservation research partnership, funding for proper preservation of the orchard, a modest annual stipend, graduate researchers rotating through for fieldwork, and, critically, on a timeline that mattered, an advance against the first year's funding that could cover the county's back taxes directly, provided Daniel signed a long-term agreement keeping the orchard intact rather than selling or subdividing it. It wasn't a fortune. Dr. Chen was careful, again, not to oversell it. This was grant money, modest by any standard, tied to research obligations that would require Daniel's ongoing involvement for years, annual reports, site visits, a legal agreement restricting future development on the land in ways that would follow the deed long after he was gone. But it was enough, with 2 days to spare, to walk into the Windham County Treasurer's office and pay the $1,400 in full, and to watch a clerk, a young woman who had no idea what any of it meant, who simply stamped the form and slid it back across the counter. Mark the account closed, which meant that the orchard, against every piece of advice Daniel had been given 3 weeks earlier, was staying exactly where it was. He sat in his car in the county parking lot afterward for several minutes before starting the engine, the same way he had sat outside the orchard the very first day, except this time the silence in the car felt like something closer to relief than dread. He signed the university agreement on the farmhouse porch in early October. Apples he hadn't known were edible, ripening unevenly in the rows below. Russ Pelletier standing witness with his arms crossed, and something close to a smile on his face. An expression Daniel suspected didn't come out often. Dr. Chen's team began arriving the following spring. Graduate students in muddy boots, a small research shed converted from part of the old barn, careful new rows planted alongside the surviving originals, cuttings sent out to 2 other research orchards in different states as insurance against ever losing the line again to a single bad storm or a single careless season. The genetic testing, when it finally came back in full, confirmed what the old notebook entry had only hinted at. The resistance trait in Ruth Whitfield's seedling was real, distinct, and absent from every major commercial cultivar currently in cultivation. Precisely the kind of narrow, overlooked thread that breeding programs spend years searching for and rarely find intact. The orchard did not become the mine of easy money Daniel had half hoped for in his most exhausted, desperate hours, and he found, to his own surprise, that he didn't mind. There was no windfall, no headline, nothing beyond a modest annual stipend and a small line of researchers who now knew his name. What it became instead was something closer to a second career he hadn't known he wanted. He learned, slowly and badly, and then less badly, how to graft, how to read a tree the way he'd once read a novel, patiently, looking for what the structure was quietly trying to tell him, how to walk Russ's old rows and know which branches to save and which to let go. He called his daughter more often that winter, not out of obligation, but because he finally had something to tell her that wasn't small talk, a graft that had taken, a research paper with his aunt's orchard named in the footnotes, a visit from students who wanted to hear what he remembered of Eleanor. He started keeping his own notebook that autumn, plain black composition books bought in bulk from the same hardware store that had sold him his first pair of gloves. In handwriting, he noticed, without meaning to, had begun to slope the way his aunts once had. On the first cold morning of that October, reaching for a jacket in the mudroom, Daniel took his aunt's old canvas apron down from the nail where it had hung for 30 years, the apple-shaped patch pocket worn soft with use, and put it on without really deciding to. It fit, more or less, a little tight through the shoulders, the fabric stiff in places from disuse. He wore it out into the rows that afternoon, past the fallen sign he'd finally repainted, and rehung at the entrance. Past the trees, Dr. Chen's team had marked with new blue tags out to the one old, gnarled, unremarkable-looking tree that had started all of it, and stood there for a while in the low gold light, in his aunt's apron, pockets full of the same kind of pruning shears she must have carried across this exact ground 1,000 times before him, in a place everyone had told him, 3 weeks earlier, wasn't worth saving.